Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Papers Podcast. We're here to try to read and make sense of the medical education literature to help you make sense of your day. And today we have the usual cast of characters. Hi, John.
Hi, Lara. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Hey, Linda.
Hey, everybody.
Jason, you have selected for us a paper about which I have many a thought, reflection, opinion. Would you like to start off our conversation?
All right, that's awesome. So hi again, everybody. Thanks for listening to the podcast. So I chose a think piece, and this I'll just foreshadow. We don't have a lot of methods to discuss this time, but I'll explain what I chose. First, I have a question for each of you. The question is around your professional identity formation, which we'll define in a minute. So when do you have a sense of when you felt like the professional you are? So, whether it's a clinician or an educator or whatever it is. So Linda, John, Lara, were you conscious of your professional identity formation?
I won't say of my formation, but of my identity, probably somewhere middle of first year out of med school, like of internship. And as an educator, actually, probably in high school. So as a clinician educator, much later. I got to tell you, though, that we did a study on this and asked people when they first felt they were a doctor. And the average was somewhere middle of first year of residency. And the things that helped that were, number one, other health professionals treating them as a doctor, not second-guessing them. Number two, patients calling them doctor. Number three, when they felt competent.
This is all retrospective. I don't think there's ever a conscious moment, which I guess is really what the PIF literature talks about. I think I wanted to identify outside of the health system very much as a doctor early on in my training. I was proud of it. I was felt, I had passed some of the rites of passage, but I still had residency in front of me. And so I was excited to say, yes, I'm a doctor. And then very quickly I learned outside of the health system, it's the worst thing to ever identify as, because immediately at every cocktail party you can ever attend, someone wants to show you something disgusting. And I'm an emergency physician and I have an iron stomach and a poker face like nobody's business, but God help me. there are people that should never you should never tell that you're a physician. So it's a bit of I'm bivalent on it. Early in my career I wanted to, and now I like to never tell anybody I'm a doctor because it just leads to too many awkward
But that's not your identity. That's who you tell other people. That's what you tell other people. Well,
it's whether you want to be identified. That is whether, I'm just taking a different lens from our typical conversation around PIF.
I really struggle to tell you when I felt, and I guess part of the challenge is I don't know what professional I am. I'm not a medical educator. I don't teach in medical schools. I don't teach residents. I don't teach grad students. So I'm not an educator. I don't have a PhD that's useful, quote unquote.
I'm just going to play that back a few times.
Right? No, I don't. And then, I'm a professor, okay, but that's a rank. That's not an identity necessarily. And to be honest, across my career span, there are times when I think I'm a really good researcher, and then there are times I'm not a researcher at all. I'm a storyteller. And then, shout out to a recent conversation I had with bless her, Lorelei Lingard. Had a conversation with her because I'm struggling a bit to think that, good Lord, people listen to me and think I actually they listen. And I'm a little worried about that. So I have to be honest, I'm not sure what my identity is in this field. I don't know if it's ever solidified ever. I'm not sure it will.
Wow.
Can I ask you a question, Lara?
Yeah.
This is a phenomenon I see in the research center where I work, which is there's a transition in terms of the scholarly professional identity. I wonder if this is a phenomenon for you, where you move from saying, I am a kinesiologist, or I am a sociologist, or I am an English studies.
Yeah, what is that? Who knows?
Whatever. I'm not sure what the ologist
what the noun
part is that?
Who knows? Yeah.
Which is the disciplinary training where your PhD sits, to I am actually an education scientist.
Yeah.
and understand the theory and whatnot, and you leave one identity and you adopt one that's unique to health professional education. Is that a phenomenon that happened for you? Because I was just wondering if there's a bunch of people on listening to this podcast that are not clinicians but are in a similar position in grad school or whatnot that might be wondering, am I just a sociologist, or is there something different that's going to happen to me?
So I do think there's, first of all, I really hope there's a bunch of people who are PhD trained or not clinicians who are listening to this, because I really hope that we're providing useful thoughts and reflections for everybody. And there's certainly a lot of PhDs in our field, right? And we're training PhDs. We can get into a whole conversation there because I got questions about that. But those are questions we can reserve for another day. But I think some people make the transition out of their home discipline into this field really readily and easily. In the US, for instance, a lot of people who are PhD trained working in our field have PhDs in education. And I think it's a shorter walk from being somebody with a PhD in education to somebody who works in medical education. I think that's a short walk. I think it's a long walk if you're in English, if you're in engineering. And then the question really is, I think one of the challenges our field has is that we are truly interdisciplinary. Bless it. Just bless the heck out of that. Notice I didn't swear. Thank you. But it also means that all of us here are kind of weird. We're anybody who's a PhD in this field, very few people still publish in their home domain. So I've never published in English since I left. I'm not sure I ever published in English, quite frankly. And so it's a very strange, and there are some people who still very strongly adhere though to their home discipline. So there are some people who are publishing in ed psych or publishing in sociology because that's their world. But to me, my work is here. This is where I work. This is my home. This is my place. And I try to contribute here. I don't think I'm useful in English.
I love that beautiful, vulnerable answer. I think you belong here. We need you.
Bless you.
Linda wants to jump in.
Yeah, just you or John, I can remember, implied that you moved from one to another identity. And I would pitch, and I think there is some literature to suggest that you take whatever you have and bring it with you, whether it be a personal identity, another professional identity, whatever. You may not be a practicing ex-clinician of some sort, nurse or occupational therapist or physician anymore. And in fact, in Europe, there are many medical educators who have, as a primary professional degree, say an MD degree or equivalent, but never practice medicine, but they still bring that with them. And so parts of your English stuff probably come with you, Lara. That's what I would pitch to you.
There we go.
One semicolon at a time.
All right. So for me, it was different identities along the way. I actually had the gift of our very expensive emergency medicine textbook at the end of medical school from one of my teachers. And in it, this person wrote, the person I looked up to, a guy named Marco Civilati, great clinician. He said, "You're one of us." Like, what a powerful statement to write inside a textbook.
Nice.
It's like, well, I guess I got to do this now. So that's a really powerful PIF event. Okay, so why are we talking about PIF? Professional identity formation is a hot topic, I would argue. You see lots more papers coming out. There's some really smart people working in this space. Lots of sessions at conferences. So I think PIF's I think it's a hot topic that's worth discussing. So I brought this paper to you. It caught my eye because it juxtaposes two hot topics in one. So this is Stearns's, Slattery, Cruz, Tenkate, Hamstra, and Steinert. And the title of the paper is Contradictions and Opportunities, Reconciling Professional Identity Formation and Competency-Based Medical Education. This is from Perspectives. It's in 2023. So these guys sort of pitch to all of us that PIF may not be compatible with CBME. So I'll just help you set it up a little bit, and then I'm going to invite everybody to jump in again. So first of all, let's just define some terms. There are a lot of working definitions of professional identity formation in the literature. Here's one that I just adopted for this discussion. It's a developmental process through which an individual's representation of self integrates norms, values, ways of thinking, and characteristics of their profession. So there's a working version of PIF. Some of the PIF purists listening to this may quibble, but let's just go with that, shall we? So this is a think piece. They assert that CBME is really popular, competency-based education in health professions, and it is inherently behaviorist because it emphasizes outcome abilities of graduates. Therefore, they say, ipso facto, CBE is incompatible with fundamentally developmental PIF. And so I just have a little quote for you. There's the very senior educator who shall not be named, who came up to me in the hall, what's it called? Like where all the booths are, the exhibitor hall at Amy one year. And this is burned in my psyche. So this is what this person said to me. This CBME stuff is all crap. You know that.
Oh,
It's just a return to 1950s objectives by another name. And then they walked off very angry. And I'm not sure why we made them so angry by existing, but we did. And so my question for all of you, I'm going to go Linda, John, and Lara. Is CBME behaviorist or is it some other epistemology? And I also want to, just before I throw to Linda, all of these people are friends of the podcast and all of them are your colleagues, Linda. So I realize this might be tough for all of us to take apart this paper, but still think the topic's fantastic. So Linda, what's your take on CBE?
So if the question is CBE behaviorist or constructivist, or something like that, it's a very simple answer. Yes.
Okay. So Linda,
you mean like C, all of the above?
It's behaviorist, but I think it's more than behaviorist. It's behaviorist if you're talking about, rewarding a mouse by doing something correct, and so they do it more and more. But I do think it is constructivist or socially constructed because it happens in an environment where there are things like role modeling. Is role modeling behaviorist or is role modeling constructivist? So I think there's a little bit of both in there.
all right. John, then Lara.
I like Linda's answer, which is yes.
Thank you. Just stop there.
This
Then.
is a fallacious straw dog argument. I feel like we're shredding the boundaries of philosophy here. Now, unlike a think piece, and this is where I should declare my conflict, I have actually done some research around this, and I don't take too much credit because Glenn Regier and Schiffer Ginsburg were also on the study. But we talked to opinion leaders from across Canada and said, describe the philosophy that underpins CBME. And the answer was it was inconsistent. And some people would talk about philosophies that are naturally orthogonal to each other and in the same paragraph make that comparison. The way we analyzed it is that we didn't see a common structure. And the reason we think that there's inconsistencies and no lingua franca is CBME a single intervention or is it more of a bundle? So when I tell you that you have a framework that defines what you need to be able to do at the end, that's classic behaviorism, right? Here's the outcome. You move towards that. And this outcome-based education is a special form of behaviorism. But when you talk about programmatic assessment and which is informed by work-based assessment, and you see that interplay of assessor and trainee in the clinical environment, that's constructionism. When you talk about tailoring learning to the individual and for them to prioritize what's meaningful and how they want to learn, that's constructivism. And so it's yes, of course it is. So I don't know what this straw dog argument doesn't make sense to me because I can't do the multiple choice question on this. I have to do the essay.
I have the same answer. I think one of the things that's beautiful about CBME is that it has elements and aspects therein that are not so tied to one scientific or paradigmatic orientation that it makes it useless in the others. I also think, and maybe more importantly, that once CBME was stated, described, and put out there, you cease to have control over it. You put it out, you offer this, and some people are going to see it in this way, and others are going to see it in that way, and they're going to play with it, and it's going to take on a life of its own. And that's both the blessing and the curse. So I'm also of the opinion, as Linda and John are, that to say that this is A or B, it doesn't hold because it's A and B and C and D, and none of it we control.
All right. So we're all kind of riffing around the polarity argument here. And sometimes when you make a commentary, you choose a position, and I totally respect that these authors might have done that in order to facilitate their argument. But that really struck me. The title alone made me think this is not a polarity. This is like a epistemological war that they're proposing. And I'm not sure that that makes sense. I also like where you guys have gone to, that maybe when you put innovations out there, it ping pongs around, gets shredded, things happen to it, and it continues to evolve. You don't own an idea that you release to the world. Okay, so just a reminder that CBME, there's a paper by Elaine Van Meller, one of our colleagues, and she said that CBME has 5 core components. So anybody can find that. It's in Academic Medicine in 2019, I think it is. And so I'll just remind everybody who's listening, it's number 1 is a framework of graduate outcomes expressed as competencies to meet the needs of those served. Number 2 is deliberate sequencing of learning from novice towards expertise. Everybody forgets that core component. I don't know why. Maybe it's not sexy. Number 3 is the choice of educational experiences that are designed to enable acquisition of abilities. Sometimes that's called the tyranny of CBME because every educational experience is supposed to connect to the outcome. And number 4 is tailored teaching to individuals' learner development. This is the one that's flexible and developmental. And number 5 is programmatic assessment. So there's the 5 core components. So in this paper, these are really smart people, by the way. Like these are great thinkers. We love Rob Stearns and all of the other giants that are on this paper. So they said they think about CBME, they think about PIF, they think about professionalism. There's a couple points in this paper, just as an aside, where they kind of lost me. There's some non sequiturs about including professionalism in the same sentence. The author said their aim is to open a conversation that can inform future scholarship and curricular innovation to integrate PIF into CBE curricula. So my next question for you, co-hosts, is what do you think of that premise? Is that worthy of a paper when you just hear about it? So I'm going to go John, Linda, Lara.
Can you give me a chance to think about it? Can I go later?
Yeah, sorry, that's a hard one.
Because I'm going to start with a real negative thing, and I don't want to be 2 negatives in a row. I'm going to say that they have a false construct, and I don't want to start there. I'm trying to think about something positive.
Okay. Lara, can you go first?
Can I give me the question? Maybe I can rephrase it in a way that works better for me.
Some courage, everybody. The question is, does the premise strike you as an important one that we need to work on integrating PIF and CBE?
Linda wants to go.
I think the premise that this is a tension is there because once CBE came out, and particularly when it was introduced at a national level or in the US by specialty, in Canada by multiple specialties, the naysayers came in and talked about reductionist and holistic and things like that. So that it was, and that has been there for a while. So people like Rob Stearns have been trying to say, yeah, we have CBME, and yet identity is something that is more holistic than that. So how can we put the two of those together? So I think that the premise of trying to integrate both of those in some way is perfectly reasonable.
Okay, so it's worth the real estate in the journal. Lara, then John?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm very happy to put real estate about this topic in the journal. I'm very happy to have this conversation. My basic fundamental problem, which is not housed within this paper particularly, it's been housed in many a conversation we've had for a long time, is that I don't see professional identity formation or professional identity as a competency. I don't. I think that to frame it as such is to misunderstand PIF, as so many people have written about it. And so when you frame it as a competence, now we got a problem. Now it's an issue.
Linda wants to jump in.
But that's not what they're doing. They're saying we have the one thing and another thing. They're not saying identity should be a competence. They're just saying, how do we do these two? How do we put these two things together?
Why do they have to go together? Why can't they exist in parallel? Why can't there be 2 streams of things that happen in our curricula, the things that happen in our educational processes that happen in parallel, but that I don't see a need to make them talk to each other, that my identity is better when I get a 5 out of 5 on this EPA or whatever.
Okay, hold that thought, because that's what the paper is about. Hold that thought. John, do you want to add anything about the premise?
I think your question is really interesting because the authors set up this think piece and they don't actually build the argument that you're asking me for. I actually went back and said, what's the value proposition of this whole thing? why should I ever imagine using PIF as the framework or lens with which I would want to set up training? What's in it? They have a few, Pollyanna-ish things like it does better for well-being of individuals. I don't know that literature. Does it? If you develop your professional identity in one way that's pro forma or prescriptive, does that actually lead to better outcomes? I don't know if that's the case. And so I need to be apologetic because I don't know this literature as well as others might. Well, certainly as well as many other people know it, but not as well as others might on this podcast.
Awesome. We're going to get letters on this one.
That's okay. But the history of where we've come from in terms of the transitions, at least in Canada, around our educational design has not been to say, hey, let's pay more attention to the individual. The reason that we went to competency-based education in like the early 90s was because there was concern from society saying we were paying too much attention to doctors. Let's start paying attention to patients and communities and society. And then this whole idea of, well, let's just pay attention to a single doctor. Well, we also have this more recent emergence of let's pay attention to teams of health professionals. And what's so special about organizing training around an individual, and let alone an individual as a doctor? So I don't get the value proposition, and the authors certainly don't provide me anything in the setup for this whole argument. So your question of do you buy it? They never provided it for me, and I am not convinced as I try to insert a value proposition on my own.
Okay. All right. I want to pick up on some of these threads. So thank you for all those perspectives. I think they're all legit, and I think people listening to this podcast will add 50 more on this topic. So kudos to the authors for setting up this polarity and making everybody engaged. The way I laid out this paper in the abstract that I made for this episode, by the way, I named this episode How to Jumpstart Your PIF in an Era of CBE, because I think that's what they're really trying to get at. So there were no methods, but I laid out their arguments in a table, just because I had to read this paper a few times to really get my head around it. So I said that in this paper, there are 4 premises around PIF and 4 corresponding problems or incompatibilities with CBE, and then they have proposed solutions. And I kind of like the solutions. I'm not sure I buy the premises. Okay, you ready? So number 1, PIF is constructivist and developmental, and therefore focused on processes. That's a really bundled sentence, and I'm not sure I buy all of it. And they said, by contrast, CBE is behaviorist, and it's focused on graduate behaviors. So just hold that argument. Just saying. I'm going to bring you all in again at the end. Number 2, PIF learning is everywhere. You can do professional identity formation work at home, in an elevator, in a pool somewhere, in a bar, whereas CBE learning is really focused on the workplace because it's authentic. Number 3, PIF emphasizes individualization. It focuses on the individual path through this world, through this universe. Number 2, CBE, the corresponding premise in CBE, or the problem is CBE emphasizes standardization to meet societal needs. And they give the example of the first core component of competency frameworks. And then 4, the last premise is PIF assessment is inherently holistic. So if you could assess somebody's professional identity formation, you'd be taking a snapshot of that person in their developmental arc. Whereas they say CBE is inherently reductionistic, and it's made up of observed competencies. They propose some solutions to all of these challenges and these incompatibilities. Number 1, they say you should take CBE and incorporate a greater focus on processes that promote healthy PIF, like storytelling and mentorship. They say we should emphasize PIF and developmental CBE stages. We should ensure the learning environment embraces diversity so that while learners are exploring norms and values and expectations through socialization, we should be saying it's okay to integrate that in a way that's unique to you and reject some of those if that's okay, that's needed. We should allow time for reflection. We should foster longitudinal relationships. And finally, we should explore how learners see themselves as a professional through longitudinal coaching and guided self-assessment with greater emphasis on narrative comments. I actually thought the dialogue in this paper was kind of interesting. They just lost me at all the polarities in the premises, but I'm really curious about what you think. So I'm going to go John, Lara, Linda.
I'm anxious because I'm not going to say positive things. I just ended on a negative note. One, there's a lot of statements here that I don't see backed by any research or any lived experience. I've never seen any kind of curriculum that shows this is how PIF actually has been implemented. I've never seen a PIF type of curriculum. I think it's a phenomenon that happens within the context of training. So this idea of let's change training and make it PIF based, I just don't get it. And then there's these non sequiturs where they say, I'll take them in turn. So PIF's developmental, and one of the elements of CBME is developmental. We build these milestones that allow you to progress forward. Then they say that PIF emphasizes individualization. I'm not sure if that's something that we should emphasize or that's desirable in our health systems, education systems. I don't know where that comes from. This idea of PIF assessment is holistic. I don't know anyone who's ever been assessed by how are you doing on your PIF development? Like, let's see what your score is. That's a non sequitur. I don't get it. It's these statements are made and not challenged. And I love the paper that would be the counterpoint paper to this that say, you know what, these views that come out of nowhere, I don't think they hold up. And so no, this line of argument doesn't work for me.
Okay, Lara.
So I have to admit, I struggled with this paper a lot. I spent a lot of time reading it. In fact, this is one of those papers where I kept going back to it thinking, I got this wrong. I've missed something because I know many of these authors, most of them, and I think extremely highly of them. And I know their thinking, I know their body of work. So I was reading this manuscript with a very thoughtful, considerate, I have to make sure I'm paying attention. And I think part of what got me is that there are things that happen at the language level in this paper that I struggle with. So for instance, when they talk about CBME behavioral outcomes versus, and I'll take them in turn as John did, behavioral outcomes versus developmental processes of PIF. At first they had me because the language they use about I could get behind their idea of process-based outcomes for PIF, where the learner is able to describe various influences, identify values, recognize. Like describe, identify, recognize. Those work for me. I can see that for PIF. But then then the language starts to move, because later on in that same section, they start talking about stages or levels of PIF. And that makes me really nervous, because stages and levels in terms of language has meaning and connotation that implies that there is a progress, or there is a right way, or there is a structure that is to be followed. And I don't believe PIF works that way.
You're finally at the better version of your personal identity. Like, come on.
Right? Like it just feels and I think the levels created by educators is thinking of PIF in that way makes me really nervous, because who gets to decide what the right level is? Who gets to decide who goes first, second, third, what those processes are? I truly believe that's a very dangerous way to start using language around identity. Nobody gets to adjudicate my identity. That's mine, and it is my growth, and it is my struggle, and it is my privilege. Nobody else's. I feel strongly about that. The next one about standardization versus individualization. I really, again, with thinking about this deeply and worrying hard about the words, I have a real problem with this idea of standardization as a goal or an ambition of CBME, or that we're tying it together. Because one of the things that I fear happens when we do that is that we forget that within standards there are values, and that there are values implied in the profession, quote unquote, in the standardization idea of the profession. And we forget that those standards and those values and those ethics change over time. And they're not static, and they need to evolve just as society evolves. Once upon a time, not that frickin' long ago, there was no room for women in our profession. And that has changed, and that has evolved, and thank God. Or thank the powers that be. And I think that's desperately important. But if we uphold that as a standard, then we risk thinking of it as an accepted norm. and not as something that has to change and evolve because the individuals get to decide what standards are. And it's actually, I feel, much more important for us to uphold, support, uplift individuals and look at the standard as highly suspect. It's something we need to continually challenge and think on and evolve. The last one about observed competence versus holistic competence. This one, I found myself, again, thinking about this really deeply and thinking about words and challenging myself to try to make sure I was catching what they were throwing. And I really do fear I don't. So I stand at the ready to be proven wrong by these authors at any point. Like, I'm happy to have this conversation. I want to learn. But this one for me is harder for me to see as helpful because I don't think you get to holistically assess my identity ever. I also don't think you get to observe my identity because that identity is mine. And so when we start to talk about observing competence versus holistic assessment, we are starting to put language on identity that is that begets a way of thinking of who belongs and who doesn't, and your identity does and mine doesn't. And that's just, I know that's not what these authors mean, but the language is dangerous.
Okay, so some pitfalls. Now, Linda, you are working in a milieu where many of these ideas are discussed. Many of these authors are from the same institute that you're affiliated with. Do you have another perspective on this?
I too struggle with it. And as I said, coming from a context where we have implemented competency-based education and then had the negative comments about it's not holistic, et cetera, and then had people try and redraw diagrams, which I know, Jason, you were involved in. We've got these competencies, they're in this concept map like this, but where does identity fit? And, identity doesn't fit as a competency. I think that's the first thing, Lara. I think it influences competencies. I think there's probably arrows going back and forth between competencies and identity. The idea of being competent fits into what influences identity formation. And I think that somewhere or other, there is, whether you call it an umbrella, a root, something around the competencies is something to do with identity. So where I am is trying to think about a concept map or some sort of visual that allows the two to be integrated. I do think that there are, by the way, there are people working on encouraging identity formation, encouraging people to adopt norms, and you may see something about that come out sometime soon, that are norms of a profession. And when they do that in a community of practice, that's where identity fits, I think.
So let me just tell you that the author's conclusion is that at the end of the day, with their arguments, CBE and PIF, while not apparently compatible, can be explicitly incorporated together in teaching, learning, and assessment. So that's it's like a very positive pitch. And you got to give kudos to the authors.
They use words like reconcile,
and
rather than integrate, which I find interesting.
Again, polarity. So you got to give credit to the authors for making us, give energy to our reading when we pick up a paper like this. So I have 5 paper clips on this one, and then we'll do a little vote. Number 1, just going meta, commentaries and HP have an important role in dissemination of new ideas, facilitating debate, clarifying discourse. So I know that some of my colleagues who live in a bit more of a positivist world, they think less of commentaries, but John's he's pumping the air. But commentaries have a role for HP. In my own department, you don't get as many points, your scholarship points, if you write a commentary.
Could I just say, though, why commentaries, we should be cautious about them? Who gets invited to do the commentary?
Yeah. Voices.
There's a meta and professional identity there.
Yeah. Number 2, innovations like CBE, as Lara pointed out early in the podcast, have a plurality of interpretations once they're disseminated. So this is going meta about innovations and ideas in our field. Attributions are part of those discourses. There's a couple of papers that we've read, but I don't think we did them on the podcast. But we did one of them where they said, we think these authors mean this. So it's like attributions that they're pitching. Number 3, we like some of the authors' ideas for explicitly incorporating PIF, like the idea of longitudinal coaching and storytelling, and making that explicit that that's part of becoming a member of our group or profession. That has potential upside. Number 4, I don't think all of us accepted their arguments and assumptions that are inherent in the author's logic. For me, this could be just a paper about PIF and the ways you can incorporate it into any curriculum. It's not really about CBE, though I understand they use CBE as a starting point. I wasn't convinced that CBE and PIF are incompatible. And number 5, for everybody who's listening, PIF is an emerging area of scholarship, presents an exciting opportunity to enhance the next generations of training designs and learner experiences. So there you go. All right, now that we've shredded that paper, let's do a quick round of votes around whether or not you think this paper will have educational impact. And I'm going to go the same order. I'm actually going to go Lara, John, Linda. Educational impact, what do you think? Lara's struggling.
I am struggling because I don't know.
So it must be low.
No, I think it can have impact, but I guess part of my problem is I don't know what kind of impact that'll be. I'm going to give it a 3.
Okay.
Because I have no idea what to do.
Migration to the mean. All right, John.
I'm a little worried. My arm is really shredded right now. And so I'm at hour 3 of 15 of this tattoo I'm getting done. And so I'm worried that my crankiness is driving my scoring. I'm struggling between a 1 or a 2. I don't think we should organize education around professional identity formation. I think there's a lot of consequences to say who's in and who's out. Lara said it far more eloquently than I ever could. That's the biggest punchline here, besides all the technical things I took issue with. I do think, though, it reminds us that we should be thoughtful of the unintended consequences of our educational designs about how we influence, and perhaps unconsciously with a negative valence, the identity of what's acceptable in our current system. So let's be thoughtful in our systems about what does this mean for professional identity? Are we just thinking about your worth is only as you contribute to the system? Is it your worth only as the individual? Is your worth only if you look like the dominant archetype? Is your worth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So it stirs that up, but my arm being shredded and what's all, I'm going to end up with a 1.
I want to see the tattoo. Linda?
Oh, I think I'm going to go the totally opposite way, and I'm debating between a 4 and a 5. I think this is an important paper. It's an important paper because it gets us to think. It's an important paper because it shows those polarities and then tries to sort of link them in the middle. So I'm going to go out on a limb, and you can shred me for it if you want, but I'm going to give this a 5.
Wow, a 5. That's amazing. I think you're pandering now. They're going to buy you coffee. Okay, I'm going to give this a 3. And for me, I don't buy the premises. I think there's a bunch of myths and unicorns that have been perpetuated in setting up the polarity. But I really like their suggestions. Like, I could actually use some of these suggestions in a future curriculum design. We can talk about identity formation, make it explicit. We can talk about norms and values, talk about conflicts. We can talk about difficult events, and those are all part of PIF. And we can talk about diversity and voices and all that stuff. So I think it has value. I think it stimulated some thinking around PIF. It's not the be all and end all. And I do think that our entire community needs conversations about innovations and the way things are attributed to them. So there you go. Oh, John wants to jump in. Well, go ahead, John.
Totally unimportant, but this brings my math nerd heart. It's like my heart grew 2 sizes too big.
Hell?
We just did the first all prime score.
Oh,
we had a 1,
Oh, you are
2
such a
3s
loser.
and a 5. So happy. I've been
OMG.
waiting for 12 years for us to hit this, and this is the day.
God.
And so, wow.
It's all downhill from here now.
but if you do the mean,
yes.
the mean score, I'm not sure. All right, so there you go. Hey, so thanks for listening to the episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you were engaged in this debate. Maybe you were cursing wherever you were commuting as you listened to us. Maybe you disagree entirely. Maybe you think this is the most brilliant paper ever made. Like Linda gave it a 5 for whatever reason. And we'd love to hear from you. The Papers Podcast at gmail.com or paperspodcast
.com.
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 That's so difficult. Yeah. And hopefully you've picked up the word of the day. And it's been a pleasure talking to you once again. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Before you go, I looked out jasonsgotafever.com. Do not do it. Your search engine and your search history will never be the same. So with that, thanks for listening.
That's #disturbing. You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.